Hi, all, and welcome back to a world of bookish adventures. My name is Shannon.
And I'm Amanda, and we're excited to share with you today's podcast. Today, Shannon is going to be sharing our first bookish adventure with you. So excited to hear about your trip to Switzerland. I've never been there, and honestly, the closest I've ever gotten to Switzerland is Swiss cheese.
I am so excited to share part one of my Switzerland trip. This was a birthday trip for myself this year and had such amazing time. So we're just going to jump into the story and I'm excited. So here we go. I got to spend almost a week in Switzerland in different parts. And so today we're going on a journey from Southwest Germany on a 6+ hour train ride to St. Gallen, Switzerland. Due to the train delays that we experienced along the way, I arrived into St. Gallen about 1 a.m. But the one thing I will share, and if you've ever been to Europe, you can probably agree with this with me, is even at 1 a.m., the trains were filled, the metro station was filled, there were so many people. It was a great time. And thankfully, the walk from the train station to the hotel was only a couple-minute walk. So thankfully, it was very short. Got to the hotel after a night's sleep, had some breakfast, and made my way to the city center.
Okay, so you said you went to St. Gallen. So I know I've heard of that before, but I'm not terribly familiar with it. So can you tell us why is it so famous?
Yeah, so St. Gallen is a Baroque hamlet that's tucked between Lake Constance and the Swiss Alps. It was founded by Gall, sorry, I wasn't Saint at that point, but it was founded by Gall, who was an Irish missionary and an educated hermit, which I actually thought that was really interesting because sometimes when you think about hermit, you don't necessarily think of educated, but he was known as an educated hermit and he created a community of educated hermits in the 7th century. It's also home to the University of St. Gallen, and they proclaim to have one of the best business schools in all of Europe. So I don't know if that's true, Amanda, but that's what they claim. In 1798, Napoleon invaded St. Gallen, and one of the first acts of Napoleon's group was to suppress the abbey. The monks were driven out of their home as well as the educational centers that were there. Through many years of back and forth and military and governmental struggles, the town of Gallen has finally started to grow again, all again centered around the Abbey of St. Gall.
Okay, so Gallen, it makes sense to me. So, what happened when those back and forth struggles that were going on finally stopped?
So this is kind of where we really come into where I think the bookish adventure begins. So in the 9th century, the site became a pilgrimage site as well as a major center of trade. And one of the main tourist attractions in that area is the Abbey of St. Gall, which is a UNESCO World Heritage Site, which I didn't know going to. So I thought that was really cool. There are 28 UNESCO sites in total in St. Gallen. So there's so many there. But today, and for our podcast purposes today, we're going to focus on the Abbey Library, which was made a UNESCO site in 1983. And for those of our listeners, if you're not familiar with that, UNESCO sites are cultural or natural sites that are considered to be of outstanding universal value and are for special importance for everyone. These sites are of natural beauty, cultural significance, maybe a combination of both of those, and they epitomize the values, the history, and the triumphs of their home country. Currently, and I thought this was interesting, Amanda, there are over 1,000 sites around the world. So the fact that St. Gallen, this one small village, has 28 of the 1,000, I thought that was pretty amazing. And that number is growing. And interesting also, a lot of people use UNESCO sites as a traveler's guide of places they want to go and explore.
It is really impressive that there's so many concentrated in Switzerland. That's not something I would have guessed, but so I've never obviously been to St. Gallen, but I've been to other UNESCO sites. And I know I'm very grateful that they have been preserved for us to learn from and explore. There's so much history and culture, to kind of understand where we came from, who we want to be as a people. So I'm so glad that those are still there for us. But anyway, tell us more about the city. So if you were our tour guide, what would we do?
All right. So, as many places in Europe, St. Gallen is incredibly walkable. Like I shared, our hotel was just a few minute walk from the train station, and from the hotel to the city center was maybe a 10-minute walk, 15 if you stop to take a lot of pictures along the way, which I did. So everything is very walkable. Once you get to the city center, one of my first recommendations is head to the visitor center, and you can't miss it. It is right across from the St. Gall Cathedral, the huge cathedral in the middle of the city center. Now, at the visitor center, they have lots of information about the village and the history and the buildings that you're going to see. But where I'm going to direct you to is to the main attendant that's there. And you're going to see on the table a whole bunch of what looks like very old cell phones. And you can get them. They're free of charge. They do ask for the ID of one person in your party to keep, but you don't have to pay for the phones. And what the phones do is they give you a map. So all around St. Gall and all in the library, which we're going to talk about today, and all of the cathedrals and the buildings and the architecture on the map, or actually inside the buildings, are numbers. And so you plug the numbers into the phone like you're dialing a phone, and it takes you to an auto recording. So it is a great way to do a self-guided tour around the area as well as within the sites in the area, and it teaches you all about what you're learning. And one other thing to add to that, bring a pair of plug-in headphones with you. I normally carry my Bluetooth headphones, but because of these phones, they do not have that technology. So bring a pair of plug-in headphones with you so you don't have to keep holding the phone up to your ear to hear everything.
That sounds like good advice to me.
I wish I had known that. And then one other thing I wanted to share is we actually found out about St. Gallen, my friend and I who went, we weren't even going to go there. This wasn't even on the itinerary. We had other plans, and we saw somebody's Instagram post who was at St. Gallen in the Abbey Library. And when we saw the pictures of the library, we knew we had to add this to our trip. So we actually went over to Switzerland a day early just to experience the library that I'm going to share with you today. And I'm so glad that we did, because it was incredible and totally worth going early for. So let's go ahead. Let's jump to the library. Let's talk a little bit about that. In the middle of the village that dominates the St. Gallen skyline is the Abbey of St. Gall. This abbey was the 8th century monastery and now home to one of the world's foremost medieval centers. The Abbey Library is magnificent, and I would even say dreamlike. So when you first get to the Abbey Library, you purchase your ticket, or you can do it online ahead of time. And you can't bring backpacks or bags, anything like that with you at the time. So they have free lockers that are there. So when you get there, you get your ticket, you go to the locker, you put all your stuff in there. And then on your way, right before the library, before you enter, these rows of large slippers. And what you do is you actually put your shoe, and you don't take your shoes off, but you put your shoe into the slipper, and you have to wear those in the library. So those of you that are listening to us on YouTube, you are getting to see the slippers, and oh, don't my feet just look lovely.
Oh, definitely. So stylish. I gotta say,
They
I'm
are.
definitely jealous right now.
So my friend was like, "Oh, it's just to keep the floor safe because it's such a historic building." And I'm like, "No, they just want all of us to polish the floors." So that's my story, and I'm sticking to it.
Yeah, it works out that way.
So once you get your slippers on and you enter the library, you can take as many pictures as you want. You can take video. You just can't have flash, which is very common in these libraries. And there's one place that you can't take pictures. They actually have a mummy there. But I will get to that in a little bit. The hall itself is lined with the most dreamlike, and I love that word that I used earlier, this most dreamlike sky, and you're underneath these fresco bookcases and the architecture in the room. And as you're first walking in, it's kind of dark, and then it opens up and there's an inscription. So as you're walking into the door and you're starting to see all this amazing architecture, look up. And at the very entrance, there is a sign that translates to healing place for the soul. And Amanda, I don't know if there can be a better phrase that represent what going into a library or an abbey or some type of book museum does for me. So I love that even before, just as you're entering the threshold, it says healing place for the soul.
I think that I would agree with that as well. So I've been other places where it's just the love for books is definitely just nourishing to your spirit. So I'm sure I would agree if I had seen it.
The library itself is one of the earliest and most important monastic libraries in the world. It holds 160,000 volumes and 1,650 books that were printed before 1500, which I thought were amazing. They have bookcases that hold different books. And what's really neat, and again, our YouTubers will get to see some pictures of this. What's really neat is on each bookshelf, if you look to the top of the bookshelf, you're going to see these little cherubs that sit up at the top. And they give a clue to what is in the bookshelf. So, for example, one section had a cherub that was observing books through a telescope. And all of the books that were in that bookshelf were astronomy related materials. So I thought it was really neat how they even incorporated the religious art into the library aesthetic and giving little hidden clues of what's in there.
Yeah, definitely. I think nowadays we'd call that an Easter egg, but same thing.
Hey, maybe they were one of the first Easter eggs.
Certainly, yeah. Pictures just look amazing. Like I can't imagine how incredible this had to be in person.
I I spent way too much time there. And I don't even think that's the thing you can say that you spent way too much time, but I definitely spent a lot of time there because you almost felt like you were walking back in time. And quite a few people that were in there with us. I would probably guesstimate to say there were probably at least 30 plus people that were in there with us. And there's no signs that say you can't talk or, you can't have conversations or be quiet, but everybody there was just kind of quiet and looking around. They had their little phones with them that I told you about that were telling them about the architecture or the books. In the middle of the library are all these books that are in glass cases. And what really amazed me, Amanda, is now again, remember, this is a monastic library. This is a library from faith. And in this library, I was astounded that they saw science and they looked at all levels of science. They had botany, they had astrology, astronomy, they had musical books, they had math. And it just really amazed me of how these monastic monks that were there studied all of the sciences. Nothing was taboo, nothing was considered non-religious or not okay. And you can see those books, all the different types of books that I shared still on display there.
That's incredible. And it's kind of gives you an idea of how much we lose by closing off our ideas to things that maybe we're not sure if we're in alignment with. But it just gives you an idea of how we got the wisdom as a species we've gotten so far. And maybe we want to continue to keep that open mindedness.
Yes, I absolutely agree. And I think that was a great word to put on it. I feel like they were incredibly open minded just of what I saw in the library when I was there. As you're walking along and you're listening, you're hearing the history, you're taking pictures, towards the left side of the room there is a huge globe which is considered to be a replica of St. Gallen's terrestrial and celestial globe. It's considered to be one of the most important cultural historical objects in Switzerland. It was completed in 1576, and this amazing globe combines the heaven and the earth on the same spherical surface. And again, on YouTube, you're going to get pictures of this. If you're not on YouTube, you can Google it. I highly suggest you do, or pop over to our YouTube channel, because this globe was incredible. The detail, the artwork, showcasing, like I said, the heavens and the earth as one celestial unit. It was absolutely
It
gorgeous.
really is absolutely mind-blowing. It's definitely an example of art and science just absolutely colliding.
It really did. And as you're making your way around, in at least when I was there, kind of in one of the corners across from the globe, they had an old book ladder, which was kind of neat to be able to see and go close. And as you're making your way around the room, there's chairs that you can sit in. And what's really nice is if you sit in the chair and you number into the phone that you have, it will tell you, like, look up, look here, look there. And I would have had a great time in the library just to begin with because it's a space that I really love. But having that narration of the history of the architecture, the history of the paintings, the history of the books, and getting that inner kind of knowledge on my own time and my own pace is something that I really, really enjoy. So, as you're looking around, kind of on the opposite side of the Abbey Library from where the globe is, you're going to see a mummy, and it is a real mummy. And you cannot take a picture of the mummy. There's actually one of the volunteers or one of the workers that are planted next to the mummy to keep an eye out for people trying to take pictures. And what we learned is that the Abbey and St. Gallen has had this agreement with Egypt for centuries, and they have always had a mummy in the library to look at, to understand, to learn about their life and the history. And this has kind of always been a part of the Abbey Library. So I thought that it was really nice that that tradition was still continuing today.
That's definitely something I would not expect to see in a library. I know I've been to a museum where they've actually had like mummified remains on display, but certainly not in a library. So that's unique for sure.
It really was. And while you cannot, like, touch any of the books, obviously, as a tourist, you can't take anything off the shelves. Just being in the presence, looking at the different books on the shelves, because you can get right up to it. They're not, there's no like rope. Like sometimes you go to libraries that are historical and they'll have rope where you can't get, so close. They had kind of like a mesh screen in front of the book, so you could get right to the bookshelves. You could see the books, read what they said. If some of them obviously couldn't understand how to get Google Translate out to know what I was reading, but from the cherubs at the top gave me an idea of the theme, at least, of the bookshelves. But it was just beautiful, and you had these dark browns and reds and these colors of the books and the leather journals, and then the browns of the woods and the mahoganies. Everything was so dark and so academic feeling. And then as your eye went up to the ceiling and you had these amazing relief pictures and the colors and the white and the vibrance, it was like you felt like you were in a church and you felt like you were in a library, and the two just blended to make this incredible, amazing experience.
That just sounds just unimaginable. So I really hope some of our listeners out there get to have this experience one day.
I hope so. And it's interesting, like I shared at the beginning of the podcast, this was not a part of the normal trip to Switzerland. We kind of had a plan, we kind of had something we wanted to do. And as I shared, we saw this on an Instagram feed from somebody else. And funny, we were actually in Dublin, Ireland, and we had just finished visited the Trinity Library, which we're going to talk about in a future podcast because both Amanda and I have been to the Trinity Library. And we were in the Trinity Library and loving it. And we were leaving. My friend went to make a post on Instagram, saw the other post about the St. Gallen Library. So then we went to the closest cafe in Dublin and sat down and began searching for train tickets and hotel tickets to add this as an extra stop just based on the Instagram pictures we saw from her friends. So I am so glad we did. I highly suggest that if you are planning a trip to Switzerland, to add this to your stop. We only spent not even a day because again we got in really really late the day before and we had to catch, I want to say it was like a 5 or 6 o'clock train to get to our next destination. So we probably only had a half a day there, and you could spend at least a day, if not two, in St. Gallen, not only seeing all this amazing history, but the nature that's there, the hiking, going up the mountain. There's a lot to do there. So I definitely recommend putting this on your bookish travel experiences because it was one of the highlights of my trip. And just to remind our listeners, because that's just the way I am, we're sneak peek probably in a couple weeks. It's going to be a couple weeks from now. But when I share my part two of Switzerland, you won't want to miss my trip to Valaris. So I'm excited to share that with you.
That sounds exciting. I hope everyone's able to be around for that one.
Me too. And I'm also thrilled to share that our next week's podcast, Amanda, now you're going to be sharing your bookish adventure. So why don't you give everybody a little sneak peek of that?
Absolutely. So, most recently, my vacation was in New York City, and I got to check out the J.P. Morgan Library and Museum in New York. So, I cannot wait to tell you about all the amazing things that I saw there.
I am so excited to hear about that because I have never been. I've been to New York City. I've done all the things, but I've not been there. So I cannot wait to hear all of your adventures.
And don't worry, I took lots of pictures.
I love the pictures.
Well, thank you all for being part of our podcast. So, we look forward to connecting with you each week. And as always, we invite you to join us on our social media pages, as well as to like and subscribe to us on YouTube, as well as your favorite podcast platforms. So you can find all of the information in our link tree.
And don't forget to share your own bookish stories with us. Please either fill out the form in our link tree or email us directly your adventures at awobapodcast@gmail.com for a chance to have them shared on a future podcast.
Read more books.
And then go explore. Bye, everyone.